Hi, welcome to Coach and Business and my newest episode on the topic of conflict solving. When talking about conflict solving, the question is how can we solve conflicts? The question is why do conflicts arise? The question is why even try to solve conflicts? Why do not just avoid them? Um, well, in my episode today, I want to emphasize on approaching conflicts and trying to solve them, not avoiding them. From a philosophical standpoint, I do think that at some points conflicts are not necessary, so one might avoid them. But if topics reoccur and reoccur and are not solved, then, um, well, unhappiness, a lose-lose situation will arise. So, in short term, conflict avoiding might be a good idea, but in long term, conflict avoiding is, as a psychologist, the not the way I would recommend. So for me, the general question is how to not avoid conflict but solve them. Well, first of all, when do conflicts arise? Everybody knows conflicts, for example, in private situations when you start discussing the future of your partnership, in work situations when two people sit in a meeting with I don't know, with other 10 people and discuss a framework for the project, and the one person is not does not agree with the idea of the other person. Both do not understand the premises of the other person and get into conflicts. You get into conflicts on the streets when, for example, you meet somebody and you argue over who was first in line to buy, for example, bread in the morning. So conflicts arise in any and every situation, which is possible. Conflicts arise on the streets when you are in your car. So in every situation, conflicts are possible. But what does a conflict mean, and why do situations escalate into conflicts? Well, there are some typical triggers which lead to conflicts arising. First of all, there is a differing perception of facts by involved parties, which this means that I don't understand what you understand. So, for example, in the political view, people don't understand the other side because their general premises do differ. They do differ when it comes to understanding of facts. We are in another reason is that we are in strong emotional state, so conflicts arise, situations escalate when we are emotionally triggered, when we are in a hard emotional state. So if we get up in the morning and we have a fight with our partner, when we get to work, then the probability that we get into conflicts is very high, as well as if we are at work and we have conflicts with our supervisor or chef, for example, the probability that we get into conflicts at home with our partner is just higher. We pursue self-defense, so conflicts arise in situations where we want to defend ourselves. And when defending ourselves, some people, for example, might get into offense, so into saying bad things about the other person, for example. We have a basic error of attribution. We as humans, this means that when we do good stuff, we think that it was us. When we do bad stuff, we think that it was the circumstances. When we argue about ourselves, we argue that it was for good things our input. For bad things, it was the environment. On the other hand, when we discuss effects of other people, we think that when something good happens, it was the environment. When something bad happens, it was the person itself, with bad attributions, with bad attributes. We have conflicting personality types, so we might have situations where the personalities of people involved in a situation just do not match to each other, and they will get into conflict each time they interact with each other. We have communication barriers, so people are not able to use the same language, are not able to show their real emotions, are not able to provide the meaning of what they want to say. For example, if we discuss life-changing decisions or to be made life-changing decisions via chats, you are only able to write, but you are not able to show your appropriate emotions to such decisions. So there is um, another aspect. We have limiting resources, which might lead in many cases to self-defense. So in case we are in situations where we have to achieve something but we have limited resources, for example our time is shortening, we are getting more nervous and more confused, which will lead to a higher aggression level potentially. Then what are the different types of conflict? So when having two parties in a conflict situation, what does it mean? We might have a zero-sum conflict. This means that the positive outcome of the winning party is equal to the negative outcome of the losing side. And we might have mixed motive conflicts. This means that both parties can benefit from co-acting, but one party gets more out of it if it gets into competition. Which might be compared to the economic prisoner's dilemma. So zero sum is we have a win-lose situation, and mixed motive means that we have a win-win situation from co-acting, but one party can benefit if it deviates from cooperating. So as a general rule, which strategies can we conduct when being in the conflict situations? What do we have, and how can we act? There is a model which we can use, which is based on two dimensions. The one dimension is, do we have a high self-interest or low self-interest, and do we have, the second dimension is, do we have a high interest for others or low interest for others? Basically, when we are high on self-interest and high on interest on others, we are in a cooperation scenario. So cooperation means that we want to support each other as well as ourselves. Then we are in the situation of competition, which means that we have a high self-interest, but at the same time a low others' interest. This means that we want to compete, we want to get basically into competition. Then we have the situation of adaptation, so we have a high interest for others but a low interest for ourselves, which means that we want to adapt to situations no matter how we feel about it. Then we have the strategy of avoidance, which means that we have a low interest for ourselves as well as a low interest for others, which means that we just don't want to be in such situations. And we have a, let's say, average value of self-interest as well as an average value of interest of others. In this situation, we want to compromise, we want to see compromises. So it's like the little brother of cooperation. So if we cooperate, we have self-interest for both. If we have or find compromises, we do have interest for ourselves as well as our counterparts, but it's not as high as possible. So we have those 5 strategies: competition, cooperation, avoidance, adaptation, as well as compromises. Question is, when can we and how can we cooperate? How can we negotiate? As a first talking point, I want to introduce negotiations. So when do we need to negotiate? We need to negotiate when the involved parties want to conclude an agreement. So if we recognize when there is a conflict, and that there is potentially an agreement, we have to make the necessary decisions in order to get a cooperating scenario, in order to agree on something, on an outcome. For this, we need people who have the decision-making competencies as well as are prepared for negotiations. If we get into negotiations, so being in conflict or potential conflict and having a potential cooperation scenario in the future, how can we with which strategies can we adapt in negotiations? Basically, we can cooperate. Cooperation in negotiations mean that we act like friends. The major goal is settlement while treating each other very gently, and we try to trust each other. We can pretty easily change our views, and the end solution is approved by both sides. So it's kind of a friendly situation. When there is rivalry, which is pretty hard, participants are opponents. The major goal is victory, not cooperation. We fight hard against the other side, and we can't trust each other. We use threats and try bottom boundaries to not make obvious what we want to achieve. And the main goal is to achieve a good solution for ourselves, not for both parties. And materialism. Materialism means that participants solve problems together, pursuing reasonable results. So we do know that we have to separate ourselves and our emotions from the problem, and that we should not, that we don't need to trust each other in order to achieve, let's say, an agreement. We solely focus on the task, avoiding unnecessary conflicts. So we have the cooperation scenario, which is trusting each other, trying to get the best for both worlds. We have rivalry, which means not trusting each other, but getting the best for myself. And we have materialism, which means that I'm not the most important one, you are not the most important one. The most important thing is that we reach agreement. Well, then one of my favorite psychological experiments, which is the robber's cave experiment. In the robber's cave experiment, two initially well-intentioned groups, two groups of kids, of youths, were then developed into rival groups and incited against each others. Afterwards, both groups were given the same goal to approach. It was important to have a common goal as well as to have shared resources. So the robber's cave experiments puts emphasis on two things. The first thing is a common goal. What we need to do in order to cooperate, to reach cooperation, to reach agreement in situations of conflict is to have a common goal. We need the common goal in order to get rivals to focusing on something, on the common goal, and we need shared resources. So in order to reach such common goal, we need both parties to have resources which are mandatory in order to solve the issue. So for example, if you want, let's say, try to save the life of your tribe. And to save the life of your tribe, you need to get over the lake, because on the other side, dangerous animals are coming and wanting to eat you. So you have two tribes. So in the one tribe, you have the wood in order to build a bridge over the lake. In the other group, you do have the people who are strong enough to hold the wood and to make a bridge out of it. So what you have is the material and the knowledge. Material in one group, knowledge in the other group. Both are necessary, are even mandatory to build a bridge. So what you have is shared resources and the common goal, saving your tribe. So what you have to do is to formulate a situation in such a way that conflicting parties will have the possibility to share resources in order to reach the common goal. Another strategy in order to solve conflicts is to improve your communication skills. So this is basically taken out of my communication coaching, but basically it helps in conflict solving. First one is asking open questions as well as asking closed questions, but in general open questions. Open questions mean that you provide a full range of possible answers, the possibility of possible answers to your counterpart. So what you do not ask is, do you like our trip? Or do you like my proposition? Or what do you like about our proposition, which is kind of a mixed suggestive question with an open question. What you could ask is, how would you evaluate my proposition, which is the most broad question you can ask. It's open, so it lets the other person to elaborate on his or her answers. Paraphrase, so try to show the other person that you do understand what he or she is saying. Clarification, so if you misunderstand something or if you're not sure, so if you think there is conflicting potential, before you get into arguing, before you get into self-defense, try first to clarify whether you understood it correctly. So for example, the other person is saying, I'm for example your chef, I'm not able to increase your raise for a certain time. And if you think that for you a certain time is not longer than half a year, because in a half a year, I don't know, your child gets born and you need the additional money and I don't know, whatever. What you might do is to ask, so what do you mean exactly? Aren't you able to increase my salary today? Will you be able to increase it like in 3 months, or will you like never increase it for the next 2 years? For example, because bad financial results of the company. So what you can do is clarifying the situation. You can summarize the situation if you want to get to the next step. So for example, if you feel that somebody is getting like too emotional over one point, so the project management, and you are the expert on project management and somebody else is an expert on project management, and the other person just needs to have a tool to use, which might be Atlassian's Jira, and you want the person to use and the person wants to use Jira, and for you it's not important whether you use Jira or not. Then you might say that, okay, so let's summarize as a tool to use for our next project. We should use Jira, and then get to the next point, so that the emotional point for the other person is not like emphasized on. You might mirror emotionality and effectivity, which is a good idea in cases where you first need to build connection with the other person. So, which means that if the other person is very loud, you should be very loud. If the other person is speaking with a low voice or with a slow voice, you should adapt to this speaking style. You should sit in the same way. If the person is telling you something about family, be the same. Tell them something about family. Show them that you like what they do and that you are the same. You should emphasize on opinions, not on judgments, which means basically that if you say this is a bad idea, the idea might be bad, but it's just your opinion. It's not that it is a fact. So in my view, the project or the idea is not the best one, but maybe you can tell me something more about it, and maybe I will learn that it has good sides. You should, if you are not in a rivalry position, inform all parties about assumptions and goals up front. So if you try to cooperate, then the possible direction is to inform about assumptions, about your assumptions, about deeper assumptions. So do not argue facts, but argue assumptions, and then tell about them if you want to cooperate, if you trust each other. Do try to understand underlying assumptions of the other person. So if there is a possibility to to not argue some facts that was spoken by the other person, for example, that my idea is bad, then try not to get into the argument, but try to understand what the reason is. So for example, is there a mother corporation which is telling the person to not cooperate with your corporation? Is there a financial restriction, for example? So your counterpart should not get into cooperation until they get their budget from the client, for example. Do avoid triggering situations. So this means if you see that some points are triggering, try to avoid them, try to summarize them, try to close them, and then try to get to the good points. Do not defend yourself, because when defending yourself, you are in defense mode. So try to be active, try to lead a situation of conflict or of communication. Understand your own goals up front, which is like pretty important, but at the same time not as easy, because what you have to do is to get into a situation and be prepared, and think about what you want to achieve. Because in many cases, what I've learned from practical work is that the reason why people fail in their ideas is because they do things which lead to failure. So they say things which are counterproductive for themselves. And at the end, you have the possibility to find a better place. So this is kind of the triggering argument. If you see that places or things or topics are triggering emotions, bad emotions, try to change places, try to change ideas, try to change topics by, for example, summarizing them and getting to the next one. So you can improve your communication skills. Then you have the possibility in cooperation to improve social cooperative solutions. You have like, I think, 4 mechanisms which you can use. The first one is exchange of concessions on matters to which the other party is concerned. So if the other party wants something badly and this is not important for you, don't show that it is not important for you. Show that it is important for you and give the possibility for the other party to achieve it. So provide concessions in situations where the concession is not as important for you as for the other party. Find bridging options. So there might be solutions which are not considered before, but might increase the cooperation level. So if you might find out-of-the-box solutions, try to consider them. Then try to provide non-specific compensation, which means that you can reward the other side with a concession from outside the conflict area. So take something which is not valid for the conflict area. For example, if you want to, if you have conflict over a building, and who owns the building is the question, then try to add something. Try to add, for example, monetary compensation to one party who will be denied the building, and the other party gets the building. Then expand the pool of resources is the 4th one, which is kind of by expanding the pool of resources, the initial resources which you are in conflict about might not be seen as important as they have been seen before. So what you can do is to put, for example, more money on the table. Then you have the possibility not of cooperation but of mediation, which is a structured process under guidance of a neutral party. The neutral party supports in providing solutions in the conflict situation. The neutral party should be, when a mediator is introduced, educated in professional conflict solving. And what they do is they use communication and negotiation techniques which we already have discussed. Then we have arbitration. Arbitration means that there is a binding verdict by a party outside of court. So you have a third party. It's not a court, but it's a binding verdict outside of court. The neutral party is trying to settle all the involved conflicting parties' needs. Often it is a unsalaried person. And you have conciliation, which is kind of similar to a process of arbitration. The conflict agreement is worked on by a neutral person, but the neutral person first talks separately to both parties in order to improve cooperation possibilities and interpersonal communication within both parties. So what you have is the possibility of negotiation, then of building situations with common goals and resources and shared resources. Then you have the possibility to improve your communication skills by different abilities. Then you have the possibility to improve cooperative solutions, so by, for example, increasing the pool of resources. And then you have the possibility to induce third parties like mediators and try to get to a situation of arbitration and conciliation. Well, what is my basic recommendation? As at the beginning, try always to solve conflicts long term. At some points you might be able to avoid conflicts, which might be a good idea on short term. Try to build situations. This is, like, again, one of my favorite psychological experiments, the robber's cave experiment. Try to reach common goals and build situations with common goals and shared resources. And try to provide concessions, maybe in areas which are not important for you, but may be important for the other side. What should we avoid in conflicts? Well, from a psychological standpoint, we should not create stressful situations by acting stressful. This is pretty simple. Be calm. Listen, react. Do not overreact. Don't create too much buzz around the problem. So try to get the problem solved behind the scenes. Try not to be emotionally triggered by the problem itself. Do not communicate via personal attacks. So don't judge the person. Don't judge the person's attributes, judge the argument, just based on the facts. Don't get into social pressure, don't get into moral issues. It's not the topic of such a conflict situation. If it's not the topic of a conflict situation. And do not use threats, of course. So don't use threats in order to achieve your goals. So don't be the one who says, well, if you don't do A, we will do B, which means that if you do B, you will lose your job. So what this would mean for me is that I would try to fight back even harder. So try to not use threats, try to not communicate via personal attacks, but judge the topic. From a negotiation standpoint, do not neglect the negotiation up front. So if somebody approaches you and provides you the hand, do not be the one who neglects it. And do not polarize opinions, which is kind of an important point for the whole social setting and for our social discussions. Try to get into extremes but get back into averages. So try to not polarize opinions. Try to not be in extremes on the long term. Try to show that you are approachable. Try to not escalate things by social pressure, for example. Try to find rational and moderate frames in order to discuss social progress, for example, or in order to discuss progress within your projects, etc. I hope I provided you some frameworks for conflict solving. Again, from my standpoint, in short term, conflict avoiding might be a good idea in some situations. On long term, conflict solving for reoccurring conflict situations is always the best step. I hope I have provided you some insights what conflict mean, how you can negotiate, and which strategies there are, and how you can create situations in which people will naturally get into cooperation by providing a common goal and emphasizing on shared resources which are available. A service as a coach, I provide a service which is called conflict solving coaching, in which we will try to enact and train how you can integrate such strategies into your daily life. So if you want to get in contact with me, just contact me via my website, coachingbusiness.com. Thank you for listening. I hope you like it. And thank you. See you next time. And I wish you all the best and a smile every day on your face. Thank you very much.